You're listening to the ESU Visiting Writers Series podcast.
I'm here with Tim Bascom, my good friend, who I've known since about 1996. He is executive director of the Kansas Book Festival and has a new book, his sixth book, called Continental Drift, which is a collection of short stories about crossing paths between the USA and Africa. Welcome, Tim.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Tell me a little bit about the class that you visited today and you're reading tonight, and maybe include a little bit about how you've been examining differences and similarities between writing fiction and creative nonfiction.
Yeah, the class I visited today was Amy Sage Webb's class on fiction, and we had a great conversation. We were looking at how does one build a story that holds a reader, and I was proposing that maybe stories are more about relationships than people realize, and that we need to realize that stories, because we all have a yearning to be connected, will be about connection versus disconnection and kind of a pattern of relationship that way. So we looked at one of my stories, and we also looked at that great classic by Raymond Carver called Cathedral that is a beautiful story about connection.
Yes.
And you were asking about nonfiction versus fiction.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I pointed out to the students in this class was that the story we looked at of my own takes place in Nigeria with a sorority girl who's come along with two of her sorority sisters on a special trip, and they're learning about Islamic art. But they keep being harassed by a young man who's trying to get them to take him as a guide in this marketplace. And they get angry at him and shove him away, basically. And later, things come to a head in a riot that happens the next day when he reappears and actually lobs a rock through a window in their van.
Wow.
That story, since we're talking about fiction versus nonfiction, began with me experiencing a man who was a rickshaw driver in Bangladesh, mm-hmm. and kept harassing me, I felt, wanting me to take him on and get into the rickshaw and he could make some money, and he just would not release me, even though I just wanted to be on the street by myself, walking and enjoying things that way.
Yes.
And so fiction so often is, even though imagined in a new situation, sorority sisters in Nigeria, it is built on something that a person's actually experienced. And I took that and brought it over to explore the relationship between somebody who's just a tourist in another country and somebody who needs to make a living. Often those who are in more privileged circumstances don't realize that's why they're being so almost desperate in trying to get business, like this character was in the story. And that was forced upon the girl in the story by a rock coming through a window. In fact, in Bangladesh, I was caught in a riot and a rock was thrown through a van window that I was in. So I just borrowed all that, but then built a new story around it.
Right. In some ways, you seem like a citizen of this world in that you've lived a number of places, you've traveled.
Mm-hmm.
We might apply the term missionary kid, things like that. And so you may have a worldly view that others might find fascinating.
I would hope. I mean, it's certainly given me stories because my parents were missionaries in East Africa, and I spent 7 years growing up in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan. And that shaped me ever after because I just find myself always thinking comparatively, and wanting also to bridge the gap between different cultures. And later I was training writers in developing countries for about 6 years, which took me overseas a lot. like to Bangladesh for a workshop that I was leading there. And I think, I feel privileged in that sense to have been able to do that kind of traveling, and it awoke things in me that I wanted to express, to bring that back to people, let them also think about what I consider some pretty important questions about how different are we, and we are, and how universally the same are we, and we are. So particularly in an age where people are, I think, in our society in America, being too divided, cross-cultural barriers, I'd like to help them be connected and to think about how we bridge the gap.
Right. Those connections sometimes are created or sometimes broken because of our belief systems. And it seems like you're somebody who knows quite a bit about that, being from a kid of missionaries and having a spouse who is important to the religious tradition and structure of Kansas. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you're mentioning my wife. She is a bishop in the Episcopal Church. For me, jumping to the Episcopal Church was a big jump because I was raised Baptist. I've had that kind of evangelical Baptist upbringing. I have not always been comfortable with it. I've found myself increasingly receptive to other points of view spiritually. Found Buddhism very helpful in thinking about my own path and journey. And I feel that religion too often divides people from each other, and looking at history, find that discouraging. But I've also seen some wonderful people who I think at some level, and probably would be found in any religious tradition, are simply trying to know God and do what is best in life, including how they treat others. And so my writing often is about something happening in another realm, another part of the world, and it is often about a spiritual matter at the same time. Yeah.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about what you would suggest for young or developing writers when it comes to their path in the writerly life, which in some ways may have some connection to the spiritual journeys many of us go through, if that makes sense.
Well, when I first think about that question, I find myself thinking that we as humans, we bounce around trying to understand our own lives, and that writing is more therapeutic than many people want to admit, and that's good. There is a school of writing and teaching that says, this isn't just a therapeutic exercise, and wants to diminish that. But I think that at its outset, almost anything that we write, whether it's a poem, a play, a short story, or an essay, is some attempt to understand who am I and what's happening here. What is life about? And so we go into it that way. A good story, a good essay, a good poem will move beyond that, where the writer begins to realize there's somebody out there who's going to read this. It's not just me in my narcissistic, solipsistic way thinking about my life. I need to somehow reach a place that will be received by a reader. But it does begin that way, and I recommend writing as a way to come to terms with life itself. Yeah.
Well, thank you for quickly sounding the depths with me a little bit. Do you have any final words for our listeners?
Be creative. It doesn't have to be in a writing form, but let yourself be creative in some fashion. Maybe it's music. Maybe it's gardening. Be creative. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate our time together and your advice. Thanks for being here with me.
Yeah, good to be with you.
The ESU Visiting Writers Series podcast is hosted by Kevin Rabis and made possible by the Emporia State University Creative Writing Program. Episodes are recorded and produced in the Donald Reichert Center for Publishing and Literary Arts. You can learn more about us at emporia.edu/creative writing or find us on Facebook and Instagram at ESU Creative Writing.